All right, Bill had asked me to go through and talk about how the ranking points are calculated within CART, so the Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool, and then also talk about this ranking specifically. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview about how those points are calculated, and then we'll go through and talk about this ranking too. So I'm the Partnerships Program Specialist on our partnership staff in our state office in Arkansas. So let's jump into CART and talk about as a whole, looking at the ranking components that make up the ranking. And so we can break it out. It breaks out into vulnerabilities, plan practice effects, resource priorities, program priorities, and efficiencies. And I'm going to explain to you what each one of these is. But you can think of these as the components that make up the total ranking score. And then we give a weight to each one of these components. So we can make certain ones of these components carry more weight in the ranking. So for vulnerabilities, this is really how the assessment questions are answered. This is a set of nationally developed resource concern-based questions. There's also questions about land use and about the farming operation, but a lot of them are tied to resource concerns. And so just in general terms, you can think of if there's more vulnerabilities to resource concerns, meaning there's really more resource concerns present out there, then there's going to be more points awarded. So what I mean by vulnerabilities is in a certain soil type may have a higher vulnerability to sheet and rill erosion. So that's really what I'm meaning by that. You can see on this screen clip up here, let me turn on a laser pointer. So this screen clip up here is really in CART where they're going through and selecting the resource concerns by down to tract and all the way down to land unit. And then going through and answering all those questions down to land unit. So it's really a lot more complicated than that. I mean, whenever you really get down to how it's been calculated, there's formulas running in the background for each one of these different overall components that I'm talking about. And it gets pretty complicated pretty quick, like the ranking component weight percentage. So that percentage we put to that component, and then the resource concern category percentage. They're all figured into this. It gets pretty large when talking about multiple land units and acres. And so I'm not going to go into detail about how this is calculated, but all this is happening in the background. So just got to think of these in general terms right now as to how the points are getting added up. So another component, overall component to the rank score is plan practices effects. And so we're really saying how well do the plan practices address those vulnerabilities out on the land to address those resource concerns. So we're really talking about the existing conditions that are being assessed, and then these plan practice effects, how well we're addressing those resource concerns. So that you can, general terms, you can think of it as if you have, you're doing more to address those vulnerabilities, then you're probably going to have more points awarded. So that's really similar to how our old ranking system worked with ProTracks. And so it's still pretty much working that same way with a lot more variability because of these formulas and stuff that are running in the background. And so, the reality of it, the CART formula is a lot more complicated, but just in general terms, you can think of it this way. If you plan more, if you're doing more to address those resource concerns out there in general, you're probably going to have more points awarded. In reality, there's different points awarded for all the way down to resource concern. So say like a cover crop has a different amount of points if it's addressing sheet and rill erosion versus if it's addressing a soil health resource concern. So there is a lot of variability in there, but you just got to think of it in general terms for now. And so this is a screen clip below of just I went into one and I just added into an assessment and I just added a prescribed grazing in there. And so this is just showing you what it looks like when they're actually adding the practices in. And so for resource priorities or resource questions, in general, these are questions that are developed by the lead partner. in RCPP. They're resource concern based. And so we actually enter these questions and assign ranking points in contrast from the assessment questions that are just nationally developed. So this is where your control comes in when you're building ranking out. And this is just a screen clip of the actual ranking when they're actually filling out the ranking and answering the questions of what it looks like. So the resource questions down here, and we're going to talk about these other type of questions also in regard to this ranking. And so they'll go through and answer these questions that we haven't inputted. So program questions, it's just another type of question that's we also have control over. So again, in RCPP, we're generally talking about the lead partner developing these questions. And so, they're program based is what the intention is. And so questions concerning prior performance is allowed, like if they've had contract violations in the past, or if, HU status, if they fit into an. Looks like we might have a little feedback going. Maybe it's fixed. So I think, let me see if I can mute people. No. Could everybody make sure that you're muted? Okay, so we will enter these questions and we'll assign ranking points. And I'm going to show you for this ranking what that looks like. So just a simple example here of what that looks like when they're actually answering those questions in CART. Efficiencies, that's the last part of these ranking components that I talked about on that first slide. It's really a measurement of how well the practices are addressing those vulnerabilities out there, those existing conditions, with the amount of funds being used. And so you can see the formula there, the national cost of practices, average of cost of practices is figured in there. So this is a really variable one. You're not going to have the exact amount that often, the exact efficiency amount. So this usually works as a tiebreaker in a lot of situations, these efficiencies. Okay, so for this particular ranking, this is how we had this broke out on the weight assigned to these different overall categories. And you can see, like on these resource questions, a lot of weight given to that for that ranking component. So a lot of weight given there to what we have control over, just to really putting this ranking into the type of questions and the type of applications you want to get out of this ranking. So for the Open Pine, for this project, we've got these different type of questions, and this is the same for every ranking. So we have the applicability questions, we have the category questions. There's no points associated with either one of these questions. I'll show you what these questions actually do. And then we've had program questions and resource questions. So by this time, they went through the assessment through answering all the nationally based questions of the existing conditions out there. They've entered the practices that were planned in there, and those calculations have been figured in. And now we're to this part of the actual ranking is what we're to. So is the planned land units 50% or greater within the project boundary? So what this applicability question does is exactly like it sounds. It's only going to show those applications in Arkansas that are applicable to this ranking pool. So this will be a geospatially answered question for this overall boundary of this project, and only the applications that are applicable are going to show up. So, or that ranking pool is only going to show up for those applications whenever you're in CART. And so planners won't have to answer this question. It'll just be automatically answered. And then we've got it narrowed down from there. And again, no points associated with that. Now for the category-based question, it will narrow that down. So all those applications we have in this project area, we're going to divide those out into two categories, whether they're within the high priority areas or otherwise. They're still in the project boundary, but they're not within the high priority areas. So it's really simple. They'll just answer that question. Well, actually, they won't even answer it. It's another geospatially based question, so it would automatically be answered for them, and it'll divide them out into two categories. And then I can fund the applications based on category. So, if we have enough within the high priority areas, if we can easily spend the money within the high priority areas, I'll have that subset of applications there. Again, no points associated with the category questions. So now when we look at, let's jump ahead and look at the resource-based questions. So will the application forest acres be reduced to less than 60 basal area by the end of the contract period? You can see these points. There's a prescribed burning type question and points associated. And see, I even had it wrong right here. For some reason, I got stuck on the wrong scenario. So I'll just replace that and fix that in the ranking. So anyway, we're just saying that 645 one, I'll put the correct scenario in there. Is it going to be a contracted practice or a 643? That scenario going to be a contracted practice, basically. And so we have to equal up to 200 points for resource questions, and then we have to equal up to 200 points for program questions. So this is what we have in there right now. You don't have to have a lot of questions when you're asking these questions, like these resource questions or program questions. You're just trying to really hone in on those type of applications you're after for a specific project. Then again, we have to equal up to 200 points. These 4 questions are nationally mandated questions. Not that I'm particularly a fan of these questions, they're just nationally mandated, and we have to put these in here. They ask some questions about the partnership programmatic agreement that the field offices, really won't be that tuned in with. They probably haven't saw a lot of this language, but we had this question in here. This is a very common question, a prior performance type question about if they've had compliance issues in the past. This is an outcomes question, so the application it'll basically read, is the application going to address one or more resource concerns for which there's outcome metrics included in the PPA, the Programmatic Partnership Agreement. So how this kind of works is when we look at the Programmatic Partnership Agreement and those outcome metrics, the resource concerns that were tied to the environmental outcome metrics were about terrestrial habitat. And so, I'll put in some hover text so that they know how to answer this question, so that when the DCs are completing this or whoever, they'll know how to answer the question. Contributions, this is another one that is nationally mandated, but the actual planners doing this ranking, they really don't know about these PPA exhibits whenever we're developing this partnership agreement. But anyway, we've got this in here, so I'll just explain it. So they're basically saying, is there a direct relationship between the land management activities and partner contributions, and application directly leverages those partner contributions? So when we look at the partner contributions, most of them are centered around terrestrial habitat. So that's kind of the hover text that I'm going to put in here. If we're improving terrestrial habitat, we should be able to answer this question yes. And so, these 2 questions, I'll have some information in there about how to answer them. They're probably going to get answered yes, I think, most of the time with this particular ranking. We also have an historically underserved question. It's really, if they fit into one of those HU categories, that's a nationally mandated question. We also have a partner application bundling question. And so if during the Programmatic Partnership Agreement, if it had been negotiated that the lead partner had this some bundled applications that they wanted to receive more funding. And so I don't think at this time we don't have haven't identified a group of applications, but that's something I'll talk to Bill more about just to make sure in this ranking that I've got this how he wants it. So also something that's been talking to Bill about some that he asked me to mention today was about I touched on the environmental outcomes for this project. Most of them are centered around terrestrial habitat type outcomes. Also got social outcomes. And so this is the type of information that we will be able to prove, we'll be able to show from these applications and contracts. you can see kind of these headings down through here, all the way down to historically underserved calculations, to percentage we fund, to application acres. This is kind of some of the information we'll be able to show from our data. We've got a confidentiality agreement with the lead partner where we can show them that. We're really limited to that agreement. Also, we've got something we've used in the past on some watershed assessments that we've completed for the Mississippi River Basin Initiative and the National Water Quality Initiative at the state level. We've used NAS data to show county level data when working on those watershed assessments. That's something else that we've did in the past. Documentation from meeting attendees, breaking that out into what kind of groups. And so I don't know, Bill, if there's anything else that you want to talk about at this time in the realm of these social outcomes.
No, I just wanted folks to know that social element is a key part of this agreement, that how we outreach, how effective, what we do, our documentation. These outreach meetings are important because it tells us how many people are contacted in what areas, what counties. We need to document all that. So I'll be following up as part of our annual report development, all of these background items. And Ann Minnie is also on the Zoom meeting today, and she's developing a human dimensions group, a social science group that will be helping us drill into a little bit more of the details of who signs up, why they sign up, and how that is develops into a outcome that helps us understand what draws people to these intermediate stand treatment practices and incentive programs. So that's really about it on the social side. And I'm open for Ann or anyone else to pick up on that, or if anyone had any questions. Roger, does that help?
Yep. Has anybody got any questions about anything I just went through?
Hey, Roger, this is Rick Chastain. Just so I'm clear, it's going to be your DCs at the county level that'll be inputting this data.
Yep, and I think some of the Quell Forever employees also do this type. Is that Ryan? Is that right?
Yeah. So all of our Quell Forever biologists do this, and honestly, it'll probably be the QF biologists inputting this data for this project.
Okay, so if there ever is a question about a resource concern or a specific that could be identified by a site visit, that opportunity for that interchange is available before the data is plugged in.
Yep, should be. And they, as far as we've sent some draft dates to Bill. We're trying to get ready to put out a bulletin in Arkansas that'll show an actual ranking deadline, and then show an application deadline. And so those draft dates, I think we had April 29th as a ranking deadline date, and then we had July 1st as an obligation date. And so we should be good. That should allow plenty of time to finish up these applications, and then plenty of time to, I know should allow plenty of time to do the obligations, because if we only do contract 10 to 15, however many we end up contracting, that should be plenty of time. Any comments on that April 20th? And this may have been something you were planning on talking about, Bill.
No, that's great. I wanted folks that the timeline has come up in the past, and we didn't have these set dates. We knew we had we had our 18th of February date as our close. And so the 29th of April then is your ranking and cost estimate deadline. Is that correct?
Yep.
And then the 6th of May is that initial pre-approvals obligation date.
Yeah, so likely that usually what we usually do is, like last year, we had about, I don't know, 20 rankings or so that I selected the funding for. And then this year, I think I built 23 so far. And so I'll go through during that week after, I'll go through and, send all the selections out. And so I'll do that during that week right after the ranking closes.
Gotcha. I would like to open it up if anybody has concerns. I mean, the main thing is this is actually a little earlier than what I had guessed would be that pre-approval. That would be the date, that 6th of May would be when landowners could be informed that they've been approved. Is that correct, Roger? Is that the easy way to describe that?
That's right. There'll be a letter sent to them called an intent to proceed letter. And so at that point, if there's any eligibility issues, we'll need to get those cleared up. But yeah, it'll be an intent to proceed letter is what it's called. That'll get sent to them.
Gotcha. And I definitely would like to open that up for any questions or thoughts from anybody.
Bill, when they get that letter, that doesn't mean that they can start their project or what they want to do. So I just want to caution people that, if the producer thinks, you gets that letter and he thinks, okay, I've got a contract, I've got room, I can get out there and do something. You don't start anything until that contract is signed, or we can't pay them for the practice.